So we were talking about Constitution 16, and we'd finished the first part showing that just slipping through that single sentence should give way to a more slow and meditative approach, asking ourselves why these words are here and what they signify. So let's go on with Constitution 16 then. All the brothers are called to mutual care, mutual cooperation, and mutual obedience. All are to be concerned for the spiritual state of the community, knowing that the good zeal of one is a help to all, whereas bitter zeal is a hindrance. So the key word here is, of course, all. That the Constitution is meant to be inclusive, to show that all are called to be actively involved in the life of the community, and that all are responsible for it. And that means each in his or her own way, whether one is a geriatric or a novice or an abbot or a nobody in the community, each has a call to contribute fully as best one can according to one's own capacity and gifts, to contribute to mutual care of one another. Care is a very important word in the rule of St. Benedict, and the worst thing that Benedict can say about a person is its opposite, somebody who is careless. Mutual care, mutual cooperation, mutual obedience. Mutuality means living in the context of another. Other members of the community provide a context for my life, and that context in some way impregnates my life with a kind of spirit that we are called to this acceptance of the whole concept of mutuality. All the brothers, all the sisters, yes, all of them. And not just an elite, not just an inner circle, but all in the community. And when we use the word called here, it's important. It's an element of vocation. That's part of our vocation. We're not called to minister to lepers or to teach in universities or anything like that, but we are called. Our vocation is to take care of the people in the community to which we are called. And that care will, of course, take different means, take different forms, but we're all called. It's our vocation to be called to mutual care. And the whole concept of mutuality, living in the context of others, it's the opposite of individualism. Instead of just living my own life in the community and going my own way and fulfilling my own ambitions, I'm called to live in the context of others. And the care that St. Benedict assigns to the abbot, therefore, is now devolves on us all. We all have to be care for one another. And cooperation means giving priority to community projects and understanding that cooperation binds people together. If you cooperate with people, you learn more about them and learn to appreciate them more, when you see the gifts that they have, the zeal that they express by their behaviour, their kindness and thoughtfulness and sensitivity, then working together is a good way of doing that, cooperating. And it's part of our ascesis, is cooperation. It's not going off and doing our own thing, however glamorously and spectacularly, but learning to live a cooperative life, whether it means doing the dishes or whether it means something else. Learning to do it in the context of others, that I'm not the only one here. I am doing this in union with others. And, of course, aware of Benedict's insight that mutual obedience is one of the best diminishments of self-will. Learning to give importance to the preferences of others, whether it be the choice of hymns or the choice of dessert, that we be content to let others make the choices, that we don't be always insisting on having our own ways. All are to be concerned for the spiritual state of the community. It's no good finding a sort of a circle of malcontents and complaining about the poor spirit of the community or the low state of the community. All are to be concerned, not only concerned, but actively involved in promoting the spiritual state of the community. To be aware of things that go amiss. And sometimes perhaps this will call us to be prophetic within the community, and thereby to be very unpopular, we maybe say. All are to be concerned for the spiritual state of the community, knowing that the good zeal of one is a help to all, whereas bitter zeal is a hindrance. So we have no place for the disinterested bystander, that we can stand back and say, oh yes, the community needs to be reformed, the community does this badly, so forth and so forth, as though they have nothing to do with me. We're not disinterested bystanders, we are called to participation. And the practical love of each member of the community builds up the community, just as bitter zeal and selfishness and so forth, and particularly envy and ambition, divide and ultimately destroy a community. It's a matter of common experience, especially envy and ambition. When people are struggling to get to the top, then eventually they destroy the community which they were hoping to dominate. Constitution 16.2, Constitution 16.3. The abbot is to govern the brothers with reverence for the human person created in God's image, promoting their voluntary obedience and appropriately fostering their gifts of zeal and intelligence. The abbot should lead the brothers so that they cooperate with an active and responsible obedience, both in carrying out their duties and in taking the initiative, all the while maintaining his authority to decide and give orders about what is to be done. So the abbot is to govern the brothers with reverence for the human person. That means there's no place for dehumanizing or belittling treatment. That the abbot would be one who humiliated people, who sought to induce humility in them by belittling them. No, he must govern the brothers with reverence for the human person, created in God's image. So it's the theological basis. Promoting their voluntary obedience. And this comes from the famous section of Perfecte Caritatis, number 14, that obedience should be voluntary. It shouldn't be something that is forced. It shouldn't be something that is demanded under the cloud of sanction. but it's encouraging them to do the right thing by persuasion rather than coercion. And they're the two possibilities to be. That's why St. Benedict sees the abbot primarily as a teacher, not as one who gives commands, but one who, first of all, who teaches, and secondly, elaborates policy, and only on an occasion formulates commands. So this is the wisdom paradigm of obedience, as distinct from the social paradigm, that obedience exists to promote the growth of the people to whom it is addressed. And so that part of the abbot's job is to foster their gifts of zeal and intelligence, to foster the gifts that are the communities. Sometimes this isn't done simply because the abbot is insecure, feels that somebody in the community is more gifted than he or she, in the case of an abbess, and therefore needs to be kept in their place, lest they reveal the inadequacy of the superior. But on the contrary, what we're talking about here, the abbot is appropriately to foster the gifts of zeal and intelligence. And the abbot should lead the community, lead the brothers, so that they cooperate with an active and responsible obedience. Leadership has recently been defined as the communication of moral energy. In other words, that somehow or other I animate you, your desire to do what I'm indicating. It's not just the giving of orders. That may be part of it. But leadership as a whole communicates moral energy, so that when somebody gets up and delivers a fiery speech and says, "Let us go forward, let us storm the ramparts and cast down the battalions of Satan," and I go forth with my sword in my hand and everybody follows me. I've given them the energy by my word. My leadership has given them the energy when they'd much prefer to be sitting there smoking. So I say, let us go forth, let us do this, let us do that. Well, abbot's not quite like that, but the idea is that a communication of energy, that he makes the people want to live the monastic life by showing them how, principally by example, but also occasionally by word. The abbot should lead the brothers so that they cooperate with an active and responsible obedience. And this is a purpose clause. The abbot should lead the brothers in such a way. In other words, he has to be a bit sensitive, doesn't he? That knowing, as St. Benedict suggests, that not everybody responds to the same sort of treatment. To lead the brothers so that they cooperate with an active and responsible obedience. In other words, enabling them to respond as adults. It's not a question of infantile obedience, but an active obedience, both in carrying out their duties and in taking the initiative. Well, initiative is not a word that one often hears in the past. One often heard that people were encouraged to take the initiative, encouraged to do what they're told, encouraged to follow the rules, encouraged to follow the directives, but to take the initiative. And that's a bit risky sometimes. Not all initiatives work out, but they can be remedied. Now, this last phrase is one that was sort of interpolated by abbots who were insecure of their own authority. It's inserted to placate the nervous Nellies who thought that too much was being given to the monks. This question of subsidiarity in particular really set some of them off into panic mode. Because what they thought the constitution should be doing is buttressing the authority of the abbot and suggesting his infallibility and impeccability, but mainly insisting on his authority. And so even when they're talking about the active responsibility of the monks, they have to exist a conditional phrase, all the while maintaining his authority to decide and give orders about what is to be done. So it's a bit of a disappointment, that addition, but such is life. And so we could ask ourselves what happened to the question of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity was denounced very vehemently by one abbot, who is still in office, as being appropriate to unionism but not to monasticism. So much for that. Constitution 16, number 4. The abbot and the officials are to communicate to the brothers what concerns all, and readily accept their desires and suggestions. So this is directed to persons in authority, the abbot and the officials, not only the highest authority but also the lowest authorities, refectorians, sacristans, all these kind of people, shoemakers and wardrobe keepers and so forth. But people with a job there to communicate to the brothers whatever concerns everybody. Effective communication is more than information. It contains an affective component and it's inclusive. So it doesn't simply mean putting up notices or passing notes. I think when I become Abbot General, I'm going to insert in the Constitution the banning of notes and notices. We have mouths and we have ears, and communication is more than information. It's also a reassertion of a relationship. It's a strengthening of a relationship. The abbot and officials are to communicate to the brothers what concerns everybody. Not everything, but, and of course the translation here is R2, is a soft rendering, but it signifies obligation. They are obliged to communicate to the brothers what concerns all. Everyone does not need to know everything, of course. And readily accept. Well, notice the adverb there. Libenter, willingly, gladly accept. If you knock on the door and go and see the abbot or the abbess and say, I've got a suggestion about, you see a freeze take place. They don't want to hear any suggestions, often enough, because that means a lot of work. But that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says they readily accept their desires even. Oh, I wish we had ice cream every Tuesday. Well, it may be a silly desire, it may be an impertinent desire, but to allow people to express their desires, because when they express their desires, they're opening themselves up in that little bit and enabling the people in authority to get to know the person they're dealing with. Their desires, welcoming their desires, and that doesn't necessarily mean fulfilling them, but being able to hear them. And hearing the desires is possibly more important than fulfilling them. Benjamin Chaminade, the expert on maintaining desired employees, says that this ability to listen to people is what solidifies their attachment to a body. To listen to what they're saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fulfill them. And of course we have to remember that saying in RB3, sometimes God reveals what is to be done to those who are younger, to those who haven't been socialized, to those who haven't been brainwashed. He reveals perhaps they point out that the emperor has no clothes. And at first their suggestion may be unwelcome, but ultimately it's a way to a fuller life. So you see, there's quite a lot in Constitution 16, which, as I say, is really, in one sense, the heart of the whole lot. If this were put into practice, then everything else would follow. It's the essential notion of fraternity that Pope Francis writes about and which is embodied in these constitutions. Of course, another expression of that is Constitution 71 on the bond of unity. Autonomous monasteries of the Cistercian order of the strict observance, as it was then decided to call itself, spread throughout the different parts of the world, are joined together by the bond of charity and by common tradition of doctrine and law. Their superiors are united by the bond of solicitude for the welfare of each community. They collegially exercise this pastoral care together with supreme authority in the order when they assemble for general chapter. The same pastoral care is exercised under the guidance of the general chapter through the institutions of filiation and regular visitation, as well as by assemblies of superiors and the various offices by which the welfare of the whole order is maintained. So we can ask ourselves, after some 38 years, what has happened to the constitutions? Let me just make a few personal observations. The two branches of the order have now come together to form a single order with a single general chapter. And this has involved some changes, especially in Part 3, dealing with the Cistercian order. Changes about participation of officers and chapters and so forth. An important change has recently taken place under Pope Francis, who has announced that the superiors, local superiors, provincial superiors, or supreme moderators of orders no longer need to be priests. Absolutely. They have to get permission at various levels for it. If it's an order that contains both clerics and non-clerics, then there is some possibility from now on for non-priests to occupy positions of authority. And what this is doing is it's torpedoing the great distinction between ecclesiastical power of governance and religious power of governance. Religious power of governance is what is exercised by religious people in authority in religious orders. For ecclesiastical power of governance, you have to be a cleric. It's a very, very curious distinction. It's partly based on this emphasis on the ontological transformation that takes place in ordination. And the question is, how long can it stay? Well, I think it's already showing signs that it will change. The second question that comes up is the applicability of core orans to monasteries of Cistercian nuns. And that probably needs more clarification and more boldness, I'd say, in saying that actually we do have a tradition of our own that covers most of the concerns that were at the heart of core orans, and that while we will certainly check things out to make sure that there is nothing that is undesirable in our monasteries, that as a whole, it seems to me that there's no need to make a song and dance about core orans. Should the order, number 3, be more engaged in reaching out to the margins? Well, that's a question that people should answer. Have we become, especially in long-established monasteries with long-established lists of benefactors and patrons and friends and supporters, should we become more engaged in reaching out to the margins? Not breaking into our own enclosure or our own traditions of withdrawal from the world, but in our own way being more mindful of what St. Benedict says about the reception of the poor as guests, that Christ is more fully adored in them. It's just a question. And with the closure of several monasteries, the question of filiation is in need of rethinking. We tended in 1892 to dismiss the idea of having regional bodies within the unity of the order in favour of the traditional idea of filiation. And that was possible because most of the monasteries belonged to the same region. They were all founded from one another. Whereas with our own case, we are at the opposite end of the world to most of the monasteries. Our mother house doesn't have an abbot at present. Our grandmother house doesn't have an abbot at present. Our great-grandmother house has been suppressed. Our great-great-grandmother house is now a high-security prison. And the mother of us all, Cito, is a recent foundation. It lacks continuity. The real estate was bought first of all, and then they looked for monks to fill it with. So it seems to me that in many cases the question of filiation is an important one. Just how you set up an ongoing relationship that has elements of supervision and pastoral care of those in authority and so forth in a contemporary situation, a multicultural situation, a multinational situation, how you do this, especially when monasteries are being suppressed and the natural order of things is being changed. The other thing, of course, is regard to visitations. I can't see why abbesses are not able to visit as efficiently as abbots. And perhaps they do so more efficiently. And that's what we're afraid of. The other thing is, of course, the whole question of participation in things like visitation, whether it needs to be restricted to superiors, whether non-superiors perceive things that are not evident to superiors. And the question of multiple visitators comes up. Perhaps more importance needs to be assigned to more comprehensive regional assemblies with procedures developed to feed input into the general chapter, which could then be representative rather than all-inclusive. At the moment, the general chapter is very cumbersome. And if you count the number of interventions that individual abbots make, it's quite revealing to see that a few people make most of them, that many of the abbots are comparatively silent. They speak when they're spoken to, as it were. And perhaps we need a whole different idea of a general chapter based on regional chapters, and that it be representative rather than just having all the abbots and abbesses together, that just elected persons. And the other thing is, in line with the principle of synodality, perhaps provision could be made for more participation by non-superiors in visitations, regional assemblies, general chapters. Somebody said to me recently, just because you're acceptable as abbot doesn't mean to say you have the skills as a visitator or as a participant in a general chapter. And sometimes, as we know, happens these days, that people are elected abbots simply because there's nobody else that can validly fulfill the role, not because they have any specific talent for the task, but simply because there's nobody else. And so, in line with the principle of synodality, we see we need to try and involve in visitation, in regional assemblies, in the general chapter, those who can serve most effectively in these roles. And of course, this is going to require a whole juridical rethink of the way the order is governed. I'm aware of that. But that doesn't stop me from making this recommendation. And my final point on this, perhaps it's got little to do with the constitutions, but I think negotiations need to begin to end the schism of 1892. It's gone on long enough. If you visit a monastery of the other observance, you'll notice small things that are different, maybe differences in the habit, it may be differences in the authority, but most of their lives, apart from their apostles, is lived in accordance with the kind of spirituality that we also have followed. And that I think that we need to start some very radical negotiations with a view to reintegrating the Cistercian order as a single unity in a single communion, allowing people to be different in their own way, conserving our own particular traditions and the valuable contributions to our life that have come from the strict observance. I'm not doubting that, but I'm saying that there must be a way, if you have enough intelligent people negotiating the question in a spirit of realism, to find a way to end the schism and to bring the order back into unity. And then we can write a new set of constitutions, which maybe only concern what was formerly the strict observance, but which are written within the context of the wider Cistercian order. That's the end of it, ladies and gentlemen.